Techniques of Inner Concentration, Massimo Scaligero. Chapter 8. Light's Threshold. The power of relation of thinking is the tissue by means of which the image of the world begins to arise as an inner world. Man uses this power of relation, but it is unknown to him. He continually joins point to point in himself, moment to moment, thing to thing. The conjunction is in reality a relation of thought to thought, from concept to concept, not from object to object. Man believes the connection to be exterior, necessary to him, whilst in fact it takes place in his consciousness. But in reality it is intimate to things. It takes place in him in accordance with a uniting process that is in itself identical to that which is the basis of living nature, bearing, however, within it the power of reawakening the original power that nature has lost when autonomous drive is vouchsafed to it. The original unity itself as imperceptible light pervades the soul of man in the moment in which he knows. But man, in knowing, can take up error and mistake it for truth. In this case, only the movement by which he knows truth. The original unity is the power of knowledge, not its content, the responsibility for which concerns man. Through this power, man is free to generate his own truth or his own error, good or evil. Precisely this determines his karma, and yet continually, with regard to this, there is the possibility of freedom as an act of responsible awareness. The original unity could not produce the contents of the awareness itself by its own authority automatically, without paralyzing the creative process of the spirit, that is, the process of self-awareness, which takes place where the I simultaneously joins and opposes the astral body through autonomous mental experience. Self-awareness must willfully, by means of assent, be able to identify itself with the original unity to the extent that it begins to realize the free movement of thinking, present in accordance with the I in ordinary knowing. At a given moment, self-awareness recognizes itself as a power of the I, which was in the beginning and remains the light of the beginning at every point of its manifestation. The disciple realizes he is the threshold of the light. The inner faculty of perceiving the light is dormant in him to the extent that it belongs to his original state, that is, his cosmic nature. When it awakens in him, thanks to correct assent, he can discover that the variety of perceptions of the world is given to him so that the soul may emit light towards things through the sense organs. This light is the continual supersensible gift of the sun through the soul. Astral etheric light always moves from man towards things. The disciple does not see this radiating of the original light by means of the senses, but he can presage it, looking at the sun as a symbol of the perennial radiating of the light in reality, of the radiating of the light. In reality, the world appears to him thanks to the sense reflections of that light, which is supersensible in itself. He does not see his own light, he emits it, and it appears to him only as reflected. The disciple can intuit how the world has become visible insofar as eyes have formed that are able to see it. The light which first of all was inner flowed through the eyes towards the outer world, solicited by the light of the sun. It has become a sensory relationship, remaining supersensible in itself. The sun has awakened the eyes to the outer light, since by means of the eyes the inner light radiates anyway. The inner light flows from the astral body as the power of the sun, but its cosmic principle operates by means of the eye, to the extent that the eye, in essence, moves from the solar logos. When the disciple understands how this light can become visible once again by becoming a conscious experience, he is truly on the threshold of the light. He then understands a task that is severe and at the same time grandiose: ceasing to kill the light. The light that radiates from him into the world through thinking and the senses is continually altered and dies, because he is not present in it with the solar principle of the eye. He continually removes the power of life from it, as it flows in him through the harmonic union of the ethers, in order that he can feel thinking to be his own, and his sensations his own. Thus, human love cannot receive vitality except from the instincts, that is, from altered light. At this point, the disciple understands the true sense of pure thinking, or of pure perception, freeing the world from the ego. He reaches out by means of ascent towards the pure perception of the light, in thinking, in sense impressions, and in breathing, which is the pure presence of the I in the life of the soul. 13. I guess this is meditation 13. The disciple, after the exercise of concentration, exercises his contemplating the light, seeing it as a nascent sun that illuminates the inner darkness. He evokes the ether of the heat and the ether of the light, radiating into the world from the spiritual sun. He must feel that the radiant power of the sun is the same power of life that animates the beating of the heart. From the spiritual sun, love and wisdom flow into the world, but man does not perceive anything but the physical sun, which is the symbol or the maya of the real sun. The entire cosmic spiritual world can radiate its forces towards man to the extent that it makes them flow first into the sun. The sun is the great mediator between the crystalline heaven and earth. The secret of the ascetic in the new era is knowing that the spiritual principle of the sun is present upon earth and operates as the intimate light of the eye. The light of the beginning, as the solar movement of the eye, disappears in the ordinary dual vision. It is reflected. Man is free only in the reflection of a light that is alive in the eye. The eye is its bearer. Human pain, regardless of its pretext, is always an interruption of the flow of light in reflected vision. The initial synthesis is ignored in its lower projection and, as such, that is, as an otherness, opposes its own source. A continual inversion of the original movement of the light unfolds as human freedom. This is indeed born of the principle that is above duality, or from the principle in its immediate identity with the world, but opposing it. It cannot be born except in the sphere of sensory otherness and from opposition to the spiritual. But the possibility of grasping oneself as the essence is willing oneself where free being arises as self-affirmation by the I. It is moving from the I. It is the I one can reach within the sphere of consciousness. Within the sphere of consciousness, man can meet the Logos, to which at one time he could uplift himself only on condition of transcending consciousness and detaching from humanity. Now he can realize this within the human. Meditation 14. Meditation of the words En arche en o logos. In the beginning was the Word. It is necessary to feel all creation being born from the original act of the Word. The disciple must keep this image as long as possible in the awareness, until he derives a living feeling from it, that he can recognize and evoke in those moments of ordinary life that tend to dull the supersensible drive in him. The sensory context is the context of duality, but it is so illusory because it can become a human experience on condition of its being duality surpassed. However, it is the surpassing that man regularly fails to pick up on. This ignorance is the non-knowledge of the Logos, that is, of the original synthesis from which determination moves, as thought that gives itself to the sensory. The synthesis is germinally complete, but in the movement of the determination it limits itself with regard to the finiteness of sense perception. It overcomes the initial otherness, but it stops dialectically immediately afterwards. The synthesis has indeed been started, but not having been recognized, it is arrested. It has its own product, the apparent world, before it, and the perceived thought that seems otherness. The context of temporary freedom. The real meaning of this is not the unfolding in the sensory, which will not allow it to go beyond the limit, but taking the synthesis to completion. The initial synthesis is given and belongs to the mystery of human evolution, but its realization is the act of individual freedom possible to modern conscious man. Number 15. Meditation on the gift of the principle of light. The light shines in the darkness. Freedom is the shining of the light realized in the will. The light surfaces germinally in perceiving and in willing, but through a destructive process which is simultaneous with a creative process. By perceiving and thinking, a man realizes the death and resurrection of the light unconsciously, in accordance with a natural process. the disciple consciously continues this process, which is cosmic in itself. Freedom is the possibility or realizing this cosmic process through the individual I. It is the conscious completion of the synthesis, that is, of surpassing the dialectic limit that prevents one from seeing the light in the intimate life of the will as the germinal power that resolves duality. It resolves duality because it contains within it all the sensory. It cannot have matter opposed to it, since matter is the solidification of the light, in the same way that the strength of the arm cannot have the matter of the arm opposed to it. In fact, it can deploy in it because this solicits its movement. The opposition of the material sphere affirms itself because of the weakening of the spirit with regard to its own form, up to the process itself in which matter appears as lacking spirit and opposed to the light, as a reality existing in itself. Meditation 16. Matter is fallen and inverted light. In perceiving thinking, light resurrects. The colours and forms of matter are born of the struggle between the light and the darkness. Meditation 17. The light overcomes darkness in the will that actuates itself in accordance with sense-free thinking. The disciple must imagine this will as a current of light flowing in the limbs, independent of the life of the torso. The current of will flowing in the limbs is the flaming light that consumes the materialness of the body. Normally, this materialness tends to affirm itself as nature by means of desire and to set itself up in the torso as a body that is independent of the spirit. The firelight of the will has the task of annihilating continuously the matter that tends to predominate in the torso. When it does not manage to entirely achieve this task, matter accumulates in the torso. It becomes fat formation with an autonomous life. Fat is the symbol of the body that builds itself, detaching itself from the central current of the will and deploying its own automatic will. In the same way, every arteriosclerotic process is a sign of the weakening of the current of the will that pervades the mineral element of the organism. The will loses its natural power over the function of the mineral element, whose function is bearing the spirit, in accordance with the cosmic archetype for the body. The initial mineralization of the organism after the adult age becomes a positive process in the case in which it is offset, thanks to ascetic development, by the separation of the forces of feeling from those of the will, in accordance with a new balance of the soul, which leaves more autonomy to the etheric body in the physical organism. This autonomy is usable by the spirit instead of by the psyche bound up to the body. There are men who, thanks to this balance, achieve the greatest psychological efficiency after the age of 50. Meditation 18. The light, as the light of the world, operates unknown in the soul. From the soul it flows out into the world without interruption. lighting up in the pre-dialectic moment of perceiving and thinking. The original light lights up once again as pure intuition, intimate coinciding and immediate knowing in sense perception, which is the moment of identity of the spirit with the sensory. This identity is supersensible in itself. At the moment in which man perceives and thinks, the I enters into the world with original forces that are immanent but at the same time transcendent, which he will only know after death or during life thanks to initiation. The disciple meditates on these forces which the I can only draw from earthly experience by descending into the darkness of matter. He begins to understand the secret of repeated earthly lives, or of reincarnation as a deep reality of human destiny. Meditation 19. Having brought contemplation of the spiritual sun to the image, light shines in the darkness, the disciple meditates on the darkness and on its connection with human freedom. The original moment of the identity of the I with the sensory is unaware, and yet dialectically always used. Thanks to the use of the force that does not know the essence, thinking becomes determination for the world of quantity. But from precisely that determination there arises for modern man the possibility of freedom from any inner obligations. The individual free act is the final meaning of the process of rationality, the process whose evolutionary function belongs to the present age. The initiation of the new times cannot fail to have this free act as its fulcrum, which for now is presented in the darkest form. In fact, it expresses itself exclusively in the sensory, that is, in the sphere of dual opposition. It has no other basis than the cerebral. It does not know its own original basis. Unaware of the source from which it is born, it cannot fail to be opposed to it, making itself a vehicle of centripetal desire, even in thinking, from which disappointment and pain are inseparable. By undergoing the support of senses, thinking cannot realize its own pure impulse. It cannot be truly free to the extent that it does not grasp the disappearance of matter in its giving itself as form, light, colour and sound. Nor does it grasp the original element which moves from it in this spiritualization of matter. False freedom, in effect, has the task of hampering the process of disenchantment from the sensory, which the universe awaits from mankind. Initiation to the new mysteries operates through the individual impulse of freedom. A wise instructor takes care above all about the birth of freedom in the disciple. He establishes with him a relation of impersonality in which the highest impulse of love and brotherhood operates thanks to this form, where the sentient soul takes possession of the relationship. It acts counter to the freedom of the disciple, damaging brotherhood. The impulse of freedom must be freed of its sentient support, so that its super-individual connection may penetrate the sensory depths. It must be realized in sense-free thinking to join with its own principle, with the power of identity and synthesis by means of which one starts to grasp the world. The freeing of the inner element from the sensory and from the psychic is the ascent by means of which thinking realizes its own nucleus of life, grasping determination, in which it normally loses it in exchange for sense content. Thanks to the discipline of concentration, thinking can live its original power, which knows no duality in determination. Thinking can experience its own original moment and find in the latter the germinally complete synthesis. It can recognize the identity realized in the immediate supersensible of the human with the divine. Rising up to the principle of synthesis, thinking lives as a supersensible experience, that which it normally realizes at the sense level as determination, with regard to the dimension of quantity, with mathematical physical thought. This is only just the outline of the overcoming of duality, which can only be completed at the supersensible level. There is no other operator than man. There is no other operator than man. There is no other meaning for the mission of man than the Logos. Reintegrating the Logos into the soul is the meaning of the initiation of the new times. By means of the ascent of ordinary thinking, in accordance with the logic of the sensory, the ascetic can experience the perception of the Logos as the final arbiter, which is to realize the original power of identity of thinking, the prime relation, which regularly escapes him, since normal observing is attracted by the sense product of the relation, from which the dual world arises opposed to him. Usually, scientific observation is simultaneously attracted by the logical product and the technological product of determination. The final meaning of it escapes it, which is precisely the experience of its arising as a pure relation. Initiation to the new mysteries prepares the disciple by means of the ascent of the same thinking from which the science of quantity arises. The thinking that appears the most materialized is that which has had the force to descend the most radically into the sensory and to quantify itself, as was never possible to Indian or Far Eastern thinking. But it is precisely this materialized thinking that, redeemed in accordance with the ascent that is relevant to it, the path of the new times, bears the resurrecting force of the I. Every moment of liberation of that thinking triggers a transcendent power of resurrection. As has been shown, it needs to overcome a state of death with regard to itself. The disciple can grasp the demand of experiencing the original power of identity if healthy trial and error brings him to observe in perception the giving of itself, of the world beyond quantity, in sounds, lights, forms, colours, etc., in which matter as a dead otherness begins to disappear. This disappearance demands being continued by means of disciplines. First of all, it must be known thanks to an unordinary act of awareness. Meditation number 20. The Logos becomes life. It unites the human with the divine in the soul, where the original synthesis operates as immediate thinking in perceiving. This thinking is already immersed in the substance of the world, being the inner content of the sensory. It is the immediate pre-dialectic thinking present in perceiving, the immediate mediation with which man enters into the secret of the world. Normally he enters it without knowing it, and he even believes he is outside of it. Because of dialectic awareness, he is not able to pick up on this penetration. He looks at being as impenetrable otherness, matter, whilst he is already penetrating into it just by looking at it, by perceiving it, by thinking it. He does not see the immediate thinking, the living pre-dialectic thought, the current of pure identity, subtle life of the unifying Logos. In perceiving and in thinking, the inner process of perceiving and thinking, by means of which the soul emits light into the world, is unknown to him. This light, unseen, dies in the material or sensual vision of the world. From this death it begins to resurrect. Meditation 21. Contemplation of the light. The disciple meditates, the light is invisible. The source of the light is in me. He must not situate this source, even if he knows the flow of the etheric current of light from the center of the heart. This etheric current sums up the four ethers that operate in the sensory. Meditation 22. The disciple contemplates the unpicturable archetype of the light as the force that devours matter and recreates it in accordance with the original order. The executive center of the cosmic force of the light manifests in the universe as the sun. Meditation 23. The sun is the symbol of the light, inner contemplation of the sun. This becomes contemplation of the midnight sun, which presupposes meditation on the light, which in turn presupposes the experience of sense-free thinking, whose presupposition is the exercise of correct concentration. The contemplation of the midnight sun is carried out in two stages. At night, before going to sleep, the disciple imagines the birth of the sun at dawn and follows its ascent up to the highest point of the sky. He must have the dazzling vision of the midday sun and be able to go to sleep with that image, conceiving, I am light. In the morning, as soon as he is awake, he must take up again the image of the midday sun and contemplate its descent towards the horizon until sundown, considering the light is in me. It is useful for the exercise to be carried out with the imaginative reinforcement of climbing up a mountain, that is, with imagining the ascent from the foothills to the peak in the evening contemplation, and the descent from the peak in the morning contemplation. But what really counts for the experimenter is grasping the supersensible content of the exercise, which is precisely the access to the threshold of the light of the awareness, which usually only takes place at the moment of sleeping at the price of an interruption of the ordinary process of awareness. In this sense, it is important to penetrate the etheric cosmic roots of the exercise, as can be amply found in the works of Rudolf Steiner, spiritual entities in celestial bodies and the kingdoms of nature, and the mysteries of the East and of Christianity. At this stage of development, the disciple must look after details of his own material existence that are capable of influencing and unfolding of the disciplines. In particular, it would be beneficial for him to know a few practicalities about outer attitudes in the moments of meditation and concentration.